Hi everybody, this is a non-spoiler review for The 10th of December by George Saunders. I read The 10th of December using two different formats. I listened to part of it on audiobook, and then I also borrowed the ebook version from my local library. I'm going to do another video on libraries, but I think it's really important to recognize that libraries serve a really important function in society, and it's important in order to have an educated populace, as well as it gives access to people for a lot of different things. And so I'm making a concerted effort to use my local library as much as possible. And luckily, my library has Overdrive, but it also has other ebook formats. And so I can go into my library's website and just look, and a lot of the books that I want to read are actually available in my library. So that's why I borrowed the book version. I would say I listened to probably 25% of the book, and I read the other 75% of the book. I mention this because I've found that with this particular book, reading it was much more effective than listening. George Saunders' stories are very simple as far as the language, and if you just listen to the story or read it quickly, you may miss a lot of the nuance and the important messages underneath in the story, and you probably won't enjoy it as much. One thing that I found with this book is reading the story slowly really added to my enjoyment of the stories. There were a couple stories that initially I didn't think I liked. And then like a couple hours later, they kept sneaking up on me, and I revisited them, and I ended up really loving them. So for this series, for this particular collection, there's 10 stories. The majority of the stories are actually available online for free. Most of them are in the New Yorker. A couple of them are in other sources. I had previously read two of the stories before. I had read the Semplica Girl Diaries, and I had read Escape from Spiderhead. And so after having gone through the practice of reading a collection of Raymond Carver, I decided I wanted to start reading more collections of short stories. I find that reading a full collection just adds a richness to my experience of the stories than just reading one particular story from an author. And this collection did not disappoint. These stories really seem to build on each other. There really seem to be a theme. George Saunders talks a lot about class and about family, the breakdown of family. And the stories, as you're going from one story to the next, there's like this richness to them that really becomes clear when you close the book, and then several hours later you're like, yeah, there was a connection between, this story and that story, and this is really interesting how these characters come about things completely differently. I would say of the series of short stories, my favorite short stories, if I were to pick two, it would be Home and Escape from Spiderhead. And if I were to pick two stories that were my least favorite, I would pick Roosten, and there was another one. And that's the other thing. A couple of stories don't really stick in my head very much. And even though they were genius stories and I enjoyed them at the time, I found that a couple hours later I couldn't remember them. But the stories that really seemed to stand out really did stand out. Do I recommend this book? I recommend it highly, 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 highly. If you're used to reading short stories, you can read through this in just a couple days. If you're not used to reading short stories, I recommend reading one story, waiting a couple days, reading the next story, waiting a couple days. Definitely, these are short stories that need to be read in one sitting. If you split it up, I feel like you're going to lose some of the experience of these stories, especially for some of the longer stories, like 10th of December, definitely needs to be read in one sitting. No question about it. Same with Semplica Girl Diaries. That is a one-sitting read. If you divide that up, you are going to lose so much of the tension and the experience of that story. Some surprises. I read Puppy, didn't think I liked it, reread it, loved it. So some of the shorter stories, they're so short and there's so much going on in such a small space that being able to read it a second time adds to that understanding and enjoyment. So I highly recommend this book. I think it was a great book. I really enjoyed it, and I am off for the spoilerific review.